tyranny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, August 28th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Richard Kahlenberg, education and housing policy consultant and non-resident fellow at the Georgetown University, on his new book, Excluded, How Snob Zoning, NIMBYism, and Class Bias Build the Walls We Don't See. Also on the program today, Trump and his co-defendants to be arraigned in Georgia in 1 week. So when they enter their pleas and hear their charges. Maybe more importantly, Trump's federal D.C. trial will start March 4th. For those of you keeping track, that is the day before Super Tuesday.
Whoopsie.
Poll shows one half of Americans say they want Trump to suspend his campaign. However, 77% of Americans say Biden is too old to be effective in office. 3 murdered in Jacksonville in a racist hate killing against black people. UAW brokers a tentative narrow agreement with GM battery maker. This now just about 16 days away from looming strike deadline. Speaking of unions, the National Labor Relations Board passes one of the most significant union empowerment rules perhaps in decades. It makes unionization all but inevitable if a majority of the workers in a shop simply file union affiliation cards. No labels will have a nominating convention in April. This, according to Joe Lieberman. And CPAC resignation brings more calls for a Matt Schlapp sexual misconduct investigation. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome back.
On the IM today, the first IM through the gates, the Majority Report with Emma Vigeland says the end of an era. Yes, there it is.
Very sad. Very sad. But, you know, the authoritarian, the deep state, they can't have me broadcasting, so they had to bring Sam back.
Kowalski from Nebraska, IMs, welcome back, Sam. I have the Emma Majority Report assessment together as requested. Cursing was only up 28.3%.
I mean... Yeah, that's fair, Kowalski. Yeah. I trust your tabulations.
The kids these days, in the way that they always got to work blue.
I've heard it's a sign of intelligence, so. Cursing.
I was going to say, that's exactly like what, Bill Cosby would tell those comedians following up, don't work blue.
Oh, yeah.
Meanwhile, he's putting roofies into people's and drugging them.
So are you, you're filling a Bill Cosby role today? Is that what you want to say?
That's why I held off.
Okay. Many people are saying.
So we're back. That's not true.
Yep.
Defamation.
Okay.
We will incidentally.
Defamation cast.
Incidentally, that brings up a point. There was an IM that Emma read.
Yeah.
At the end of the show on Friday, during the fun half. I don't think it was a freebie Friday. I don't know.
No, it was during the fun half. Yeah.
And the IMer was incorrect. And I have a call for I've been contacted for a retraction and a correction. I will give that in the fun half today. We'll discuss it. And then there's that misinformation was pretty straightforward, and we're going to correct that.
Good.
I want people to tune in, but I want to do it around the same time so that anybody who'd listened at that time would be more likely to hear it. I'm not going to bury it in the first half of the show. Also, I'm going to, Matt and I are going to have a debate on his words during that moment. And we're going to decide whether that needed to be a retraction as well.
Good. Good.
People can stick around for that if they want. Meanwhile, over the weekend,
he and I have to definitely debate. That's what I love.
We will get to that. We should say, just breaking right now, that story about when Trump's trial is going to be held in D.C. and the arraignment. Again, the arraignment is just you're going to watch all of them come in and basically, I think they have to be there, or maybe just their attorneys, and enter their plea. Although I'm not 100% sure if they all have to be there, enter their plea, and hear their charges. But let's get to this. Jacksonville, Florida, a gunman who ended up killing himself. But we know from his manifesto, this is according to the local sheriff, set out to kill black people and killed 2 shoppers and an employee at a dollar store in Jackson, Florida. It's being investigated as a hate crime. The sheriff came out and was pretty explicit.
I mean, he had apparently tried to go to a local HBCU beforehand, and was turned away by a security guard, and then he just went down to the dollar store.
He was wearing a shirt over a tactical vest, mask and gloves. And this, I guess the whole thing lasted about 11 minutes. Here is Jacksonville City Councilwoman Jacoby Pittman spoke with CNN.
This is a tragic moment. My heart is heavy, and I'm just tired seeing all the shootings. You know, we have 4 districts into one, and as a community, the mayor and I was just together on this past Thursday, and we want a solution. Our sheriff is doing the best that he can, but as an alignment and resources to the community, we got to keep working together. This right here today was a tragedy. And I understand, I think the young man who was doing the shooting, I think he has been killed. But the people in this community, they're hurting. And they have every right to. You know, this makes no sense. I am very, very angry right now. I'm emotional. You know, we got kids in this community seeing all of this, and this is unnecessary. You know, it's unjust that we can't even walk on the sidewalks. We're not safe in any stores, and I'm looking for opportunity. This community needs to come together.
Let's pull up. Do we have the? I think it was the sheriff. Basically announcing what they had found about this guy.
I mean, the manifesto was well documented, and reportedly, a swastika was etched into the gun. So,
yeah,
it's pretty clear what happened.
Identified, Nazi. What's really amazing has been some of the Republican responses to this. We'll get to that later in the program.
But yeah, I mean, I don't want to hear much about mental health. This is a story about white supremacy.
I mean, look, those two things are not mutually exclusive, we should say.
Agreed.
But here, this sheriff puts it, I believe he's the sheriff. Yeah, he's the Jacksonville sheriff. Here it is, T.K. Walters.
Portions of these manifestos detail the shooter's disgusting ideology of hate. Plainly put, this shooting was racially motivated, and he hated black people. He wanted to kill niggers. That's the one and only time I'll use that word. I want to be very clear that there is absolutely no evidence that the shooter is part of any large group. We know that he acted completely alone. If you take a look at the images on the screen, you'll be able to see what he utilized. The weapons that the shooter used today are a Glock and an AR-15 style rifle. This is a dark day in Jacksonville's history. Any loss of life is tragic, but the hate that motivated the shooter's killing spree adds an additional layer of heartbreak. There's no place for hate in our community, and this is not Jacksonville. As a member of this Jacksonville community, I'm sickened by this cowardly shooter's personal ideology of hate. Homicide detectives are actively investigating this tragedy, and despite the fact that the shooter is dead, they will continue to investigate this until we have a complete understanding of what happened and even why he did it.
At one point also, he says, the guy is clearly disturbed. But again, the fact that the guy is disturbed, we have a society, and presumably there's no reason to believe that we don't have a lot of societies where there are this type of disturbed people. But their access to guns, and on top of which, the idea that we don't have, we have the whole country was, racism has been here as long, if not longer than the country itself has existed. And the idea that we can just wish it away because, apparently there was a black president, or because you sometimes have black politicians. I mean,
Well, today is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech, and Saturday, the day that the shooting happened, the hate crime happened, was the National Day of Remembrance on that front. And it's just a stark reminder that this is so unfortunately enduring systemic racism, and it just underscores how important continued activism in the vein of what we saw on the March on Washington, how important that is.
Yeah, and we should say that that March on Washington was about jobs and freedom.
Yes, that's
and we're going to talk to Richard Kahlenberg in a moment, who has a very interesting perspective. He has written in the past about affirmative action. At one point, years and years ago, in law school, had felt that it was in legal jeopardy. I mean, we're talking 40 years ago, 40 some odd years ago. And has written extensively on other mechanisms to use based upon class, or really geography, as a means to both get racial and class diversity in universities, and broadly for benefits for society. And largely that's the theme of Excluded, how Snob Zoning, NIMBYism, and class bias builds the walls we don't see. We'll get to that in just a moment. First, got a new sponsor today. It's Trust and Will. You can find them at trustandwill.com/majority. I mean, one of the things I will say this, when I first had, God bless you.
Thank you.
When I first had, I never really thought about having a will when I was younger, really until I had kids, or maybe it was when I got married, but we got pregnant so quickly. And you don't really think about those things. And then when you think about them, you get intimidated because you have no idea what to do. That's basically how it went for me. And then if you actually sort of bust through that and say, I got to do this, then you're like, this is going to cost me an arm and a leg. I'm not going to do it. I am telling you right now, that's the beauty of a site like Trust and Will, because you can do this from the comfort of your own home. It is incredibly straightforward, and it is something that you really, really want to do. One, for your peace of mind, but really, the value of estate planning, which makes it sound, sort of intimidating, but the value of having a will or a trust, which is more or less like a will before you die. I mean, or I should say like a one that, broadly speaking, it basically makes sure that whoever you're leaving whatever you have to doesn't have to go through a very, very complicated and protracted, probate process through court. Also, if you have kids, even if you have a pet or whatnot, and it's important to you who ends up taking care of these folks, the way you do it is through a will. And it also, if you have more assets, you have multiple kids or whatever it is, multiple siblings or parent, the way you avoid some type of like family messes. And the thing about, and I'm very hesitant to do any type of like services that are financial or whatnot. This is really something that everybody genuinely needs. And the beauty about trust and will is that it is incredibly highly rated. You can check any type of reviews, any type of sites that do this. They will give it incredibly high reviews. It has high reviews from all of the users. And I've gone through the process. I already had my will, but I went through it just to check it out. It is super easy. They ask you a series of questions that give a sense of like what's going to be important. And within moments and for really a reasonable amount of money, you can have your will essentially executed. They have live customer support. It's available through phone, chat, and email. They also allow you to upload some documents in a completely encrypted bank level encryption in terms of all your information. Like I say, thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot. Hundreds of thousands of people have used it. Gain peace of mind today with Trust and Will. You get 10% off plus free shipping of your estate plan documents by visiting trustandwill.com/majority. That's 10% off and free shipping at trustandwill.com/majority. Honestly, do not put this off. If you're in a position where you have some assets and you don't have a will, I know if you're anything remotely like me, you've been putting it off. Don't put it off. Just go do it. It'll make you feel so much better. All right, quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Richard Kahlenberg, education and housing policy consultant and non-resident fellow at Georgetown University, author of Excluded, How Snob Zoning, NIMBYism, and Class Bias Build the Walls We Don't See. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. I want to welcome back to the program education and housing policy consultant, non-resident fellow at Georgetown University, author of his most recent Excluded, How Snob Zoning, NIMBYism, and Class Bias Build the Walls We Don't See. Richard Kahlenberg, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Zoning, housing zoning sounds like the most dry topic possible. But it is incredibly important in the way that our society is structured. Let's just start, like, who is this book for in your mind?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll tell you, we struggled with the title. Do you put zoning in there? Because it does put people to sleep, but it's enormously important. It basically decides who gets to live where in America, which is enormously important because the neighborhoods we live in, all sorts of research suggests, have a huge impact on educational opportunities, access to transportation, access to jobs. So So anyway, so we ended up putting it in the title just to explain to people what we were talking about. The audience is really a number of folks. I mean, I'm interested in public policy makers and journalists, but the general public, I think, if anything, my book is aimed at fellow liberals who I think don't realize that while they take the righteous position on not building a wall to Mexico, being welcoming to immigrants, also often live in upper middle class neighborhoods where there are walls, invisible walls, built around them. So, for example, a community might say, anyone's welcome to live here so long as you can afford a single family home that's detached and sometimes on half an acre lot. And that's routine in America. About 75% of the land in urban areas is dedicated to single families only. It's illegal to to build anything else, apartments or other things. So that's who I'm trying to reach, to basically make people more aware of the fact that they are part of a system which builds walls to exclude, and that they are real victims to this phenomenon.
There's sort of like in I think all of your work has centered around this sort of dynamic where both like class ends up being a proxy for race and race ends up being a proxy for class. And the idea being that, like, just give me your sense of like how that interplay works. Because, I mentioned before the break about your plans for addressing affirmative action before it even was limited by the Supreme Court. I mean, I know you wrote quite a bit about that, particularly during the Trump years when it was clear, where this was headed, and the idea of using geography on some level to both achieve racial diversity, but also class diversity.
That's right. And you can see behind me, other side, Bobby Kennedy, and my kind of going back to the 1968 campaign for president. He, brought together Black people, working class whites who now will tend to vote for people like Donald Trump, brought them together around common issues of class discrimination, class inequality. Kennedy realized that working class people of all races have a raw deal in American society. He was very attuned to racial inequality and was a strong supporter of civil rights, but at the same time said, well, we need to think beyond just Black and white and also think about some of the bigger structural economic issues that create unfairness in American society. And so that's kind of a through line in all my work. I mean, I was on years ago, Sam, you're not going to remember this, but
I do remember.
About labor organizing as a civil right. And so the concept there was that it's wrong to discriminate based on race. It's also wrong to discriminate based on class and say that if someone just wants to join a union and join the middle class, that they ought to be discriminated against. I mean, the penalties are so weak right now if an employer fires someone for unionizing. That's true in the affirmative action area as well. I was deeply concerned that places like Harvard, on the one hand, did a great job of creating racial diversity, which I support. But on the other hand, they had, 15 times as many rich students as poor students. And so that's a way of addressing race, but not addressing fundamental issues of class. And in this book, I'm trying to make the same point. In American society, we have the Fair Housing Act, as we should. As a result, racial segregation between Black and white people has declined by about 30% since 1970. So that's the good news. It hasn't declined enough, but it's declined some. Meanwhile, our economic segregation is skyrocketing. It's basically doubled during that same period. People used to live in mixed income neighborhoods. Now it's much more common for poor people to live with other poor people, wealthy people live with other wealthy people. So throughout this work, I'm trying to raise consciousness about these class issues, in part because substantively, I think a lot of these issues are class-based, but also politically, that the best way to divide the Bobby Kennedy coalition of working class people of all races is to say we're only going to focus on race, and I think that's been a mistake.
Well, I want to come back to the political question for a little bit. Let's stay with just from a purely policy thing. One of the things I found that you write about is that once the Fair Housing Act was passed, which was 68, I think it was, there were spikes in local exclusionary zoning that sort of are akin in some ways to the 14th Amendment says you can't, or 13th with 15th Amendment, you can't deny people the right to vote on based on race. And so all of a sudden poll taxes show up and literacy tests, because the way that people are going to exclude black people from having political power, they can see an association between being illiterate and having been a slave, because you're not going to learn there. What does that tell us about that? And then how is that morphed so that it almost like some of the vestiges are still there of the racial bias inherent in these things, but it's also been sort of like, to the extent that there's been any progress, it's a bias against working class people.
That's exactly right. So there were two big upticks in exclusionary zoning. So these policies that ban apartments and ban multifamily housing. The first came in the early 20th century. There was a terrible practice in many communities, Baltimore and elsewhere, where there was racial zoning. If you were black, you couldn't buy in certain neighborhoods by law. I mean, it was a horrendous set of policies. That was struck down by the Supreme Court. So communities figured out very quickly, well, if we ban multifamily housing, we will keep most black people out. And so that was the first wave. The second big wave, as you suggest, came in the early 1970s. And you saw an uptick in exclusionary zoning again. Communities doubling down on making sure that they weren't going to allow people of modest means coming in response to the Fair Housing Act. So you couldn't discriminate directly by race, but you could discriminate based on class. And so that's what we've seen happen throughout the country. What's interesting at the same time is that because the discrimination is class-based, when we get to policy reforms, the Coalition for Change is also class-based. And so there's something exciting in the possibilities around change on this issue.
I mean, certainly, like I could see the implications in New York City, where the, particularly like within the context of like local schools, elementary schools, but also in the context of districts. I mean, New York City does it a little bit different, obviously, than the rest of the country because of the size. But you can see that the implications in terms of education. Can you walk through like what the implications are of these and the regulation is not so much the issue as the self-sorting, although there is some of the regulation is associated with it in New York, I guess, based upon how high you can build and how big in certain areas. But will you walk us through what these regulations end up doing?
Yeah. So I've actually spent most of my career writing about education, and I was drawn to housing because housing policy is school policy. So one of the early findings in the educational research was that it matters a lot who you go to school with. So education spending matters, that's important, but it also matters whether your classmates are rich or poor. And low-income students can do amazing things if given the right opportunity, but when you concentrate poverty and all the low-income students are in one school, all the wealthy students are in another school, that feeds the achievement gap and impedes educational opportunity. And so for years, I worked on, policies that tried to promote more choice within the public school system, not vouchers, but within the public school system to get over those barriers. But I kept knocking up against the fact that, 71% of students attend neighborhood public schools. And so if you're going to deal with school segregation by economic status and race, you have to deal with housing policies. And so I had a piece in the Atlantic recently that talked, for example, about Scarsdale in the suburb of New York City. And there, they have an essential ban on multifamily housing. There are a few units around the edge of the town, but for the most part, you're not allowed to build multifamily housing. And Scarsdale, astoundingly, has 0% of its students eligible for free and reduced price lunch, which is kind of a standard indicator of economic disadvantage. So the exclusion has been virtually complete. Nearby Portchester, which is home to a lot of immigrants, a lot of Hispanic workers, some of whom mow the lawns in Scarsdale.
Right. You make the point in that piece that all the people who work, provide service for people in Scarsdale, can't afford to live in Scarsdale. They live in Portchester.
That's right. So housing policy is education policy, and that's why I think it's important. Most of my friends in the education world, they focus their attention on what the school board is doing, what the state education policy folks are doing, and that's really important. But they also, I think, should be focusing on what the housing authority is doing, what the zoning rules are, because that has a huge impact on educational opportunity.
It seems so sort of like embedded, almost like woven into the way that we think about location now in this country, because every educator we've ever had on this program has said in one way or another, you tell me the area code of where a kid lives, and I will tell you with a 90% accuracy as to and tell me what the average income is there, and I'll tell you what the scores are on the testing there, and what the outcomes are in terms of educationally, with a 90% accuracy or something to that effect. And we have this notion in this country where it's like, if you can afford to live in a good place, you live in a good place. There's good schools there, and if you can't, well, that's what it is. Rehan Salam, and I think it was The Atlantic, wrote a piece in response to your book. And I should just say, there's also, I can't also help but think about a conversation I had with Professor Eddie Glaude years ago on what he called the value gap, I think it was, where we're practicing, white supremacy by making these decisions in many respects. I'm going to go to the neighborhood with a good school, but it ends up like being segregated because of largely along lines of class. Go into that notion of, I guess, of what Rehan had written. You were generous with his response, I thought, but you do have to cite it's something he wrote 15 years ago to when he was reasonable in my estimation. But go ahead, I won't. But talk about what the response is from the right before we sort of get into what the response is from the nominal left, I guess.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say Rehan Salam, who was making the argument that exclusionary practices are kind of natural, that of course people are going to hoard opportunity. They don't want people who are going to use services but not pay the same amount in taxes. So if that landscaper lived in Scarsdale, his kids would go to the school, but the marginal tax rate's not quite as high, and so maybe he wouldn't contribute as much. I mean, this was astounding to me that kind of he came out and said it, because I think a lot of people think that, but it was out there. Having said that, a lot of conservatives are very supportive of zoning reform for entirely different reasons. It's not for them primarily a matter of civil rights or exclusion. They want the government to essentially deregulate and say, well, listen, if I own this property, I should have some more say over what I can build on this particular plot of land. So there's a libertarian argument for zoning reform, and there's an economic efficiency argument, because it's really bad for productivity in this country when people can't move to areas where there are good jobs. It used to be people moved to opportunity. So you would have, Black people moving in the Great Migration up north, where there was less overt racial restrictions and also better jobs. Okies moved from Oklahoma to California. That doesn't happen anymore. People are leaving California, even though there are a lot of good jobs in California, because it's not economically productive. So I actually think this is one of the rare areas where you could get some bipartisan interest in zoning reform. It's just that there's kind of an ugly or exclusionary side that Donald Trump embodies that's out there too. There's a war within conservatism and there's a war within liberalism over these policies.
I am less hopeful that war is going to turn out properly, at least on the conservative side. But let's talk about that, because it does feel like there has been a flip over the past 40 or 50 years in terms of like the relative conservative and liberal positions on this type of zoning restrictions. Talk about that dynamic.
Yeah, well, as a liberal myself, it kind of pains me to say that the worst forms of exclusionary zoning are in liberal areas in the country. And so I think it started with kind of a positive instinct to want to protect the environment, to want to make sure that we have a good democratic processes where everyone gets a say. But these tools have been weaponized to stop exclusion in places like Scarsdale. The less benign explanation of why there's worse exclusionary zoning in liberal areas is that there is some research that highly educated people who today tend to be more liberal, supporters of the Democratic Party, are less racist. They have less racial prejudice, which is a positive thing. You'd expect education to do that. But they're more biased against economically disadvantaged people and people with less education. They look down upon them. That's what the experimental research suggests. And so, if the cardinal sin of the right is racism, the cardinal sin of the left is elitism. And so we have to grapple with that fact that the worst types of zoning are in these liberal areas. I should say Fareed Zakaria is the one who made that point about the cardinal sin. I didn't mean to say that as my own.
Right. Well, okay. But isn't it also, though, that the real driver behind this is that property has become the most accessible, like people's homes have become the most accessible sort of means of growing intergenerational wealth in this country, particularly over the past like 30 or 40 years. I mean, I'm just like thinking of like, my folks in Worcester, like their homes increased in value over the prior, like 50-year span by maybe like 3%. And then over the past like 40 years, it feels like, well, even in Worcester, I mean, things are a little bit slower, but even there now, like the value of homes are increasing. And there is this fear that if somebody builds like a triple decker or like a 3-family home next door to my single family home, the value of my home is going to go down and I'm going to lose money. Is it like, how much of it is that, it seems to me?
Oh, that's a huge driver. I mean, property values has been a prime argument in favor of exclusionary zoning since back in the days when there was racial zoning. That was the argument made by the mayor of Baltimore. He said, listen, we want to protect the property values of white people because if some black people move into the neighborhood, property values will decline. So property values is central. And we have a system in America where we encourage individuals to overinvest in their housing. So they could actually make more in the stock market typically, but they overinvest in a single asset. And so they are terrified that if there's any change in the community, that could negatively affect basically their nest egg for retirement. And so it's understandable that people are anxious and worried. The best research suggests that there will not be a big negative effect on property values when there's multifamily housing nearby. Even some of the publicly subsidized housing has been found not to decrease property values to the extent that it is tastefully done and is done at an appropriate scale. So I think that's part of the point is that the fears are overblown that this is going to have a negative effect on property values. But the other piece of it is that one person's property appreciation concerns is another person's housing affordability concern. And so young people in particular have been up in arms about the way that exclusionary zoning artificially limits the supply of housing and therefore drives up prices. We had this issue during the pandemic when used car prices went, they skyrocketed, right, in part because of supply chain issues. So we had this artificially constrained supply. That's what government policies that around zoning do on a daily basis.
Isn't it more just like also a question of what is the societal interest here? Are we there to protect the property values of individual homeowners who had the also ability to invest in said home? Or is the societal interest about expanding certain resources, whether it be through schooling or through like creating more livable areas for a variety of different people, and fostering that? That's the central question that, honestly, to your point, states with large populations in places like New York or California, they've basically essentially punted and sided with the property owners on that front.
Absolutely, you're right. There is a tension in the values here, and in a lot of states, the NIMBY forces, the not in my backyard forces, have won. I will say though that when I started researching this book back in 2017, there were not a whole lot of examples of success where NIMBYs lost. You could basically bet on NIMBYs. It was a safe bet to say property owners are the ones who are going to show up to meetings. They've got political power. They're going to stop reform. And in the last 5 or 6 years, that's flipped. And there's still setbacks in places like New York, but also successes in California and Oregon and Minneapolis and Charlotte. There are lots of places where the housing prices have just become so out of control that there is political support for taking that bigger vision and saying what is best, as you framed it, Emma, is what is best for society and also for new home buyers who want to get into the market but are priced out of it right now.
So where, like, when we talk about locales or the type of locale that we're talking about, that is essential to this. I mean, and presumably this is a policy change you'd like to see everywhere, but where describe to me, is it Scarsdale? Is that like the model, or or places like that? Give us a notion of, like, generically speaking, where we're looking at. And I do think there, just to add on to what you guys were saying, that it is healthy to look at this as people are hoarding. It's a wealth inequality thing. People are hoarding it, just like, we have problem with Social Security because so much money is being hoarded above where we tax people on the cap. We're having the same problem with housing because housing value, if you look at it not in terms of specific units, but in terms of value, is being hoarded. And like in a place like Scarsdale, the doors being shut, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. So the exclusionary, wealthy suburbs are the worst offenders. And I think that it's important to address that front and center. One of the arguments that Rehan Salam made was that's going to be too hard a fight. So let's focus elsewhere. The easy targets for reform. As if he's telling Martin Luther King, don't go to Birmingham. That's just too big a fight. You can't win there. And obviously, King took the opposite approach and said, let's go to the places where they're the worst offenders and address that. Having said that, the cities are also often part of the problem. And so one of the astounding points is that, it's in cities where 75% of the land is typically set aside for single family homes. A place like New York City is not typical. So in Minneapolis, it was 70% of the land was set aside for single family homes. Nothing else could be, no duplexes, no triplexes. It was illegal to do that. And that's what prompted the reform. And now it is legal to build a duplex or triplex anywhere in Minneapolis. They got rid of that exclusionary policy.
What are the things around a policy? Like, I want to get to how we do this, because we're talking about hundreds, thousands of different, municipalities, counties, or whatever it is, and how we address that. But before we get that, what are the sort of the knock-on requirements as well? Because I'm thinking, just in if you have a city where there's individual houses, and you start to build multi-unit houses, well, then you need more parking, or you need to bring public transportation in ways that it doesn't move. And this is all these are all good knock-on effects, particularly when we're talking about things like climate change and whatnot. I mean, density is actually sort of the thing that we sort of want now. What are some of the other things that would be required as sort of undergirding before we get to sort of the overall sort of mechanism to make this change?
Yeah. Well, I think if you're talking about local reforms, legalizing multifamily housing is the first step. Reducing those lot size requirements that drive up the price of housing and make it less accessible to people. Beyond that, there are some smaller things that need to be done. So, for example, you were bringing up the poll tax issue. In some communities, they'll allow multifamily housing, but they'll say, well, you can have it so long as you use this expensive brick siding, which drives up the price even of the multifamily housing. So that's one of the tricks that's used. So that's another thing to go after. I think in addressing parking requirements, off-street parking requirements that are exaggerated. There was one place in Connecticut where they said if you had if you were living in a single apartment, you had to have the builder had to set aside 3 parking units off street for that one, basically presumably one person, and so that is it's basically a poison pill that's going to make it unfeasible for any builder to develop that. So there are all these tricks that are employed, and for that reason, I've advocated at the federal level and at the state level something I'm calling an Economic Fair Housing Act, where people could sue a local government for this panoply of exclusionary tactics that they use. It's not just one; they have many. And then the burden would be on the city to justify why they need this very, very exclusionary policy. It borrows from civil rights law, but it's the same sort of concept.
And how would they what would be the standards? I mean, I guess there would be some type of
well, Minneapolis
algorithm.
just did this with the single or with the parking spaces, right?
Minneapolis rolled back the things, but what you're talking about is a federal way in which to address the refusal. Because Scarsdale, for instance, Scarsdale, if I'm a politician in Scarsdale, the last thing in the world I'm going to do is to roll back these exclusionary zonings because it benefits every one of my constituents.
Right.
And we've shut the barn door, and that's it. And unless you have a certain amount of money, you can come in and pay for this, lot size or size house or whatever it is, you're out. So politically, but what you're suggesting is that those zoning regulations, if you did not have a locality that was going to roll them back on themselves,
Right.
could be attacked because of a federal right that exists. But what would be, do you have a notion of like what the algorithm is? Like, I mean, people proposed, let's say, for instance, gerrymandering solution to the Supreme Court, where people measured what what constituted a wasted vote in one district versus another. Like, how would you, like, where would the threshold be for zoning that was impinging upon someone's rights from an economic perspective?
Right. Well, I'll say two things. First, I'm going to completely agree that kind of political science 101 is that you want to move the decision-making up the chain. So either from Scarsdale to the state level, where you have more people who are negatively affected by what Scarsdale is doing than positively affected, or up at the federal level. And then as to your question about it, kind of how this would work, the statute that I'm working on with Congressman Emanuel Cleaver from Missouri would say that it kind of borrows from disparate impact law in civil rights, which says the defendant, in this case the city of Scarsdale, would have to demonstrate that their policies are necessary to achieve the goals that they've identified. And I think it's going to be, let's say they're worried about traffic, or if they're worried about overcrowding of the schools. I mean, they'll put a bunch of reasons that they want to have this policy in place. I don't think it'll stand that you have to have a minimum of an acre lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. In order to make sure that the schools are not overcrowded. So that's the kind of a judge ultimately would decide these issues, but that's the case law upon which the Economic Fair Housing Act is based. There is an existing mechanism with respect to racial discrimination now. It hasn't been that effective because you have to link it to race, where usually these exclusionary laws are really based on class. They're trying to discriminate based on class.
This question just came in from an IMer and was actually one that I had. From a political standpoint, why? And I imagine your answer is going to be they're not mutually exclusive. But the Faircloth Amendment, in terms of like its limitations on building public housing, if we can't repeal that, how do we get to here?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I'm in favor of doing that. There's a lot of things that we should be doing in the housing arena, but there is proof of concept that you can get zoning reform through interesting political coalitions. So in California and in Oregon, there was bipartisan support for zoning reform to legalize the duplexes, and in California, it really is, you can subdivide your lot too. So it's basically you could put 4 units on what had been a single family home unit. And it would not have passed without some support from white rural Republican legislators. And and the same thing happened in Oregon. It was the margin of victory was based on some Republican support. And who was it? It was kind of that Bobby Kennedy coalition, where people who felt excluded, either because of their race or because of their class, came together and made these reforms. And I think that it'll take some time for an Economic Fair Housing Act to pass at the federal level. But what I'm hoping is that there will be some demonstrations of state level success for these types of economic fair housing acts that would eventually build some support for bringing this to the federal level.
What does that success look like? Like in the event that we're able to, roll back the zoning regulations in these areas, and it becomes, I guess, I guess in some instances you'd have sort of like maybe public housing, but more than likely, you'd get some developers saying like I can get 4 units of renters or something like that. What do we, when these things go through 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, you get the data from what do you expect it to look like that is going to be able to, you're going to be able to say like, look, once we do this, this is what happens.
Yeah. Well, Minneapolis has the lowest inflation rate of any city, in part because its housing costs have not gone up the way everyone else's has, because they're building more housing. In California, we've seen an explosion in the number of they're called accessory dwelling units, ADUs. They're kind of granny flats or small apartments that you build along, either within a single family home or in the backyard, and so that's had a positive effect. I mean, the downstream effects of change are considerable. So you get housing prices would not accelerate as fast as they have been for years when we've had this artificially constrained supply. You have improvements in the environment because now to get housing, someone can actually live near their job. I mean, in Minneapolis, there was testimony from workers at SEIU who worked in the hospitals, said, they had to live so far outside Minneapolis and take 2 buses to get to their job. And a lot of times it's going to be cars instead of buses. And so that's, we'll have improvements for the environment. We'll have better educational opportunity for kids because there will be less exclusion of neighborhoods that have strong public schools. So we'll see a lot of the things that people want in society, but are now being constrained by these government laws that are telling people where they, in essence, where they can live.
And how is it? I mean, do you have a sense of like the level of support in Congress? I mean, it feels like this is a multi-year effort in Congress. And are there organizations that are sort of national organizations or regional organizations that are sort of going in and targeting cities or towns? Like, is there or is it just they have to organically develop within a specific locale in terms of the activism or a push for this?
Yeah. Well, in terms of your first question about the prospects in Congress, I testified before Congress, and it was fascinating to see the Republicans and the Democrats. They managed to snipe at each other on, about rent control and a number of issues that they disagree on, more Section 8 housing vouchers, that kind of thing. But basically, they agreed on exclusionary zoning, that it was a bad thing. And they as I say, they came at that conclusion from different points of view, but they agreed. And so there was a very modest piece of legislation that was part of a recent omnibus bill called the NIMBY Act, which provides financial incentives for local communities to reduce exclusionary zoning. So that was a small baby step in the right direction. In terms of kind of grassroots organizations that are pushing reform, I'm so impressed by the various YIMBY groups, Yes in My Backyard groups. They've been showing up at some of my book talks, and they're enthusiastic, and they have pushed for reform in Minneapolis and California and elsewhere. So these are people who recognize the harms caused by exclusionary zoning. But there have been, interesting political coalitions, not only in California and Oregon, which were bipartisan, but even in Minneapolis, you had, renters and labor unions and environmentalists and civil rights groups all coming together and saying the current system of excluding people through zoning policies and making housing unnecessarily expensive is unsustainable. And the key was that they activated those whose voices, or helped support, I should say, those whose voices had been essentially shut out in the past. So, there was one study that looked at who shows up at zoning meetings. There's one in Massachusetts, Lowell, Massachusetts, which has a predominantly Hispanic population. There was only one person over several years with a Hispanic surname who spoke at these meetings, because it was the wealthy white men, particularly, who were showing up. So Minneapolis reversed that and was able to bring voices in that had not been part of the conversation before, and that helped make a difference.
That's interesting. Yeah, I imagine there's a huge delta there in terms of like what these boards are used to getting in terms of political pressure has probably just been really narrowly tailored. It's really interesting stuff. Richard Kahlenberg, the book is Excluded: How Snob Zoning, NIMBYism, and Class Bias Build the Walls We Don't See. So I think actually you guys did a pretty good job on the title in terms of making it sort of a little bit sexy. It is really, it's great stuff. I really appreciate it. We'll put a link to the book, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it.
All right, folks. We're going to head into the second half of the program, wherein we will talk a little bit about some of the Republican candidates running for president. As you're aware, there was a primary the other night.
Yes, primary debate.
Primary debate.
Yes.
And I joined you on it for briefly, but you guys racking up big numbers.
Oh, I know. Somehow, I mean. It was, I guess we just got into the algorithm.
We're really crushing it on the commentary. People were like, please, like, you're letting these guys talk too much. Like, we want to hear what you have to say.
More of Matt and Emma, yeah.
Is it really, like, that hard to predict what they're going to say?
No, I love it, though. It's so, funny. It's just funny to me because it's like, our views of that is like, it's great how many people are watching this.
Yeah.
And they think, like, we're going to be upset that they gave us one of those 920,000 views, and then sent a comment saying they don't like our commentary. It's like, no, I appreciate the engagement.
I apprient the
You've
click.
already done your job.
Yeah, but also the important thing is that like that's what's good. That's what will bring the country together.
Mm-hmm.
Is
we get some subs
hearing. We're allowing both sides to be heard simultaneously.
Yeah. Right.
Also, I will be amending a statement. I just agree with Jesse Singal of how I'll be amending it. So not to actually,
You guys have agreed?
Yeah, I just agreed.
Have you been on Twitter with him?
I have been on Twitter. Yeah.
What are you doing, Matt?
I'll fight with him on Twitter.
You're going back and forth right now.
But yeah, basically, I what I called lies last week, I want to amend to a pattern of misleading.
Wait a second. We were going to have a whole debate about this.
Okay,
and you're already conceding.
Well, now you know his position, so you have an advantage, Matt.
Exactly.
I mean, Sam.
He's taking my position.
Oh.
I may have to argue your position.
Just so we can, show both
I'm still
sides.
going to argue my position. Which is that I don't care what's going on in his head.
Well, I'm a little bit upset because he's called this show stupid. And, stupid has a very narrow definition too, right? I mean, he's going to argue the specifics. I mean, I thought you were, Matt, but now you've already conceded. You're going to argue the specifics of what the word lies means. Very, very narrow definition, although people, say that's a pack of lies, can mean broadly in its totality misinforms people, even if there is no specific false quality each sentence if they are sort of like analyzed in and of itself.
Right.
But to say overall that this show is stupid, do we have stupid elements in the show?
Certainly.
Of course. No person is 100% of anything. But to say in totality the show is stupid, I think that's defamatory.
Yeah.
But
well, look, I don't want to.
Look, let's save this debate for later.
Yes.
Talk about stepping all over it, Matt.
I mean, we've got the good stuff, the stuff people come here for. We're going to do that in the fun half.
Exactly.
Have some fun with it.
Folks, just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show, free of commercials, but you also get the fun half. And if you're a member, you should also know we put all the links to our advertisers where you get it like a discount in the podcast or YouTube description. And so if you ever wonder, like, wait, what was that link? What you can usually do is just Google Majority Report and the name of the product, and it will take you to the show where the link is. And then, eventually, probably like 5 or 6 years, I will get around to updating our advertiser thing on the website. So that's one way to go about it right there. And that'll be done, Also, I should say this as an enticement to get you to become a member. It was almost a year ago to the day. Maybe it was 12 months, 13 months. My youngest child came on this program and made some serious revelations about me that we are still it's been tied up in court for quite some time. It's against my better judgment, but he will be in studio
when?
Next week. He's going to be here for a couple of days because it was either that or figure out, like, I'm going to pay for camp for 3 days. Like, he's got school starts on a Thursday.
Yeah, you were saying that makes no sense.
Doesn't make any sense. So
it doesn't start the day after Labor Day, like
nope,
pretty
it
much
does not.
Everybody does.
So
that.
the day after Labor Day, that Tuesday and that Wednesday of next week, we do our Labor Day show pre-record. But the Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm not sure which time he'll come on. He may come on both, but it'll be good because you'll be here and he won't be able to like run the field as he did last time.
Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, Bradley created a very permissive environment, I would say, by becoming Saul's friend and allowing him to feel comfortable saying the things that he said there.
Yeah.
So Bradley won't be here to poison his mind against you.
Oh, good. Because he sees you here and he thinks he can get away with anything. I don't know why.
More tech deck ramps.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, he's out of that. Also, don't bring that up. But let's keep that there.
Oh,
but don't bring
yes.
up the tech deck ramp because I may have going to go bye-bye. All right, Emma.
Yeah.
ESVN
today, we're going to have a fantasy football expert on to talk about your upcoming drafts. Dan Schneier, someone who I've become friends with through football Twitter. He'll be with us. He does a Giants podcast and also a fantasy football one. We'll be talking about the Trey Lance trade, one of the most horrific busts in NFL history, I would say, given what the San Francisco gave up to trade for him, as well as an update on the FIFA FIFA suspending that guy who sexually assaulted the female soccer player on stage. YouTube.com/ESVN show today.
Matt.
Yeah, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We did the first section of the Communist Manifesto with R.M. Brown, which was very fun. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning. I went for about 2 hours. I mean, we thought we were going to get through 2 sections, and no. So we're just going to take it one section at a time.
Folks, we'll see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare! Bring back DJ Denner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs that look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them. Fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We're back?
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's read that I am. We have that I am from Affluence Wretched. Let's wait until we have some time. Oh boy, Matt got very pedantic. Matt's gone to the bathroom. He's coward. Such a coward, Matt. Running away from where I was about to hand it to him. What do you got?
Oh, nothing.
Are you all right?
I'm seeing the interaction. There's potential for direct confrontation.
You know what I love about, like, I've noticed it's like with everything. Like they'll say this about guns. Like the amosexuals will say this about guns. You don't know enough. You don't know the difference between a cartridge and a magazine, and you don't know the calibers of guns, and you don't know how many rounds a specific gun can shoot off in a second, and you don't know any of those things, and therefore you can't. Yeah, I saw that. You can't speak to this. And we're going to get this. Apparently, Jesse Singal wants to call in tomorrow. You can call in. Call in anytime.
He's busy.
Now, I know that he must know. He's done all the research on the show. But we'll get into that later.
Okay.
But yeah, what? Look at you're distracting me. God damn it. Here is let's get to this Vivek thing.
Okay.
Because it really, I don't know. Which one do you want to go with?
5. Let's do 5.
5 first?
I think so.
Let's start with 4 and then get to 5.
Okay.
Because here's how sort of decrepit this guy is. Now, look, frankly, I don't care if he's a sleeper cell candidate. He's Soros-backed, whatnot, like...
he did take a Soros scholarship to pay for Yale, apparently.
Yeah, and he's got some powerful friends: Peter Thiel, Leonard Leo, friends with current Senator J.D. Vance, PayPal connections.
And I know that he maligned Donald Trump in his book and yada yada yada. He's changing his tune. That's not relevant. This is just so gross to me. in fact, when we were talking to Richard Kahlenberg about his proposal to roll back zoning restrictions, Rehan Salam wrote a piece in The Atlantic saying, you know what? It's the shrillness. It's the pushiness of all the yimbys that is really polarizing. I remember years ago, I was on Hayes' show, Chris Hayes' show on MSNBC, and Christine Todd Whitman told me that, who was the former EPA under George Herbert Walker Bush, the reason why the right doesn't believe in climate change is because the liberals and the Democrats and the left has been so pushy about it that it forced us to take
what you made us do.
And here is Vivek essentially making the same argument that people who are fighting against racism are actually generating more racism.
Said that racially motivated violent extremism is on the rise. This is clearly part of that. What would a President Ramaswamy want the Justice Department to do about this racially motivated violence that we're seeing on the rise?
I think that every criminal deserves to be punished to the fullest extent of the law, especially when they're carrying out premeditated crimes like this one. This is a heinous crime. My heart goes out to the families who were affected by this. It is tragic, and this should not be happening in the United States of America. I think the fact of the matter is, Chuck, it is really just a symptom of a deeper, new form of national division that we have created. And I think one of my top jobs as the next U.S. president is really to lead with
now, pause it for a second, because I want you to really pay attention to this, because this is what the right will always do, and this is what they're doing these days, whether it's in this context, whether it's in the context of CRT, whether it's in the it is always like it's an individual act